This is the Willfully Evolving Woman podcast with your host, Sarah DeHaven. Today we have a very special guest, Michael Tsarion. He's a scholar, philosopher, and author of incredibly valuable works such as Disciples of the Mysterium, An Inquiry into Selfhood, Dragon Mother, A New Look at the Female Psyche, and Adultism, The Reign of the Terrible Mother. Michael's knowledge of psychology, and in particular female psychology, is quite deep and vast, spanning the conventional realms of psychology, but also those key pieces of the puzzle that seem to be all but forgotten, perhaps even feared, by today's modern professionals in the fields of psychology and mental health. If you're a woman who wants to regain access to your timeless inner beauty, to wield your feminine powers for the forces of good, if you want to willfully evolve most purposefully with agency, true empowerment, and self-ownership, then this is a show that you will not want to miss. So let's dive right in and hear what Michael has to say. Right, Michael, thanks for coming in to do this interview today. I'd like to start by looking at the topic matter of human misery versus neurotic suffering, because if you look around in society these days, I mean, it's been ramping up for some time, but we can certainly see that there's no relief in sight when it comes to mental health for humanity, but particularly because we're focusing on women. I was wondering if I could get your insights into how neurotic suffering is so, like, why it's so prevalent in our society right now, especially with regard to women.
Oh, well, yeah, it's so many approach roads to that. You're talking about the Freudian description that he gave, that there's a polarity between legitimate misery, which we all experience, and there's nothing wrong with that. You never need to see a psychiatrist because of it, legitimate misery. And then there's neurotic suffering. And you do need to see experts for that, because as he was trying to advocate, there's something abnormal in that. It's very strange too, because of course Freud and the ones who followed him, they just see neurosis as it's not a natural phenomenon, but it's something that has become ubiquitous. And it really means that there's tension within. Man becomes neurotic, woman becomes neurotic because there are conflicting emotions or conflicting drives, and we know there are. And this is where it can become intensely, deep. You can enter into the whole of psychology just from that little aperture right there. You can get into Adler, you can get into Karen Horney and Fromm and many other great thinkers at that point. It's so vast because of that. So, but again, just to keep it simple, legitimate misery is life. It's, encountering the reality principle. It's leaving the comfort of the womb and the comfort of a loving mother, and hopefully during this sort of eatable stages that lead up to age 7, there's been nurture and there's been care and there's been sensible parents, not asking for the moon, but what we are asking for is that there's a stability, there's a level of education, the parents aren't extremely poor and in a deep emotional tension, that a mother is in a good environment, and she's not frozen with fear, she's not submissive and just rolling over to what some fucking doctor in a white coat tells her. She's not in conflict in her relationship with a man at the time or boyfriend, She's not single, would be a big one, All of these things that used to be natural. Oh, she's in a lifestyle where she's working a lot with her hands, not just pushing buttons on a phone all day long. We know that breeds more estrogen, which gives, birth to more daughters than it did in previous ages, where a lot more boys were born because women were working the farms, looking after the chickens, gardening, mending, working side by side, with their husbands in all sorts of constructive things that tool use, making jewelry, fixing fences, working with equipment. See, that's all gone. So both men and women have more estrogen pouring through them, less testosterone, which is already having a biological effect. Don't want to get too sidetracked here, but yeah, there's many things that the female in her life when she's giving birth as a mother need to have in place, and also just the correct autolog. And therefore, the child that she gives birth to will be less neurotic and will be more likely to have a masculine disposition. And that by the time that they're 7 years old, which is a pivotal moment in the life of a child, they're much stronger morally, and they're much stronger in terms of temperament. And then character, which is going to develop as you enter the world, has a better chance of being something worthwhile. Character develops later. Temperament is something you're born with. But the temperament of a person is definitely dependent upon the family unit, the dynamics there, that family constellation. So, obviously going through a divorce, your parents are fighting each other. Yeah, not probably a very good idea, because that means that by the time the child is even 2 years old and 3 years old, it's been hearing arguments. It's been hearing what we would call competitiveness in the wrong sense. The child is witnessing a fight in which one of those two people is going to come out on top. So later, when feminists are complaining about this thing called competition, are they aware that mothers are installing the competitiveness in the child? They're 50% of the problem, because remember, many, many mothers win the fight. Many women are browbeating their husbands in court. Are they going to take responsibility for that? No, they just blame men 100%. You're the ones who caused the trouble. You're the ones who created the argument. That's demonstrably false. But from a little child's mind, it sees this thing called competition and gets to hate it. Oh, that's going to be good for their adult life as they shrink back from competition, as they become bloody communists or something, or anarchists. Look at what's happening in our world. That happens right down at the age of 2, 3, 4, 5, where you're experiencing nothing but conflict in the family. But it's more than conflict. One person is going to come out on top. And you identify with both parents. So whoever comes out on top, you're not particularly happy about that situation. So what do? You don't hate the parents. You hate competition. And don't realize that you're just shooting yourself in the foot, or your parents should take responsibility for that. See, when there's no harmony at home, these are the kind of then after effects which will then create neurotic patterns, of which there are many. But the ones that I think you are addressing here are the really severe ones that will be things like self-loathing, a hatred of, in other words, autophobia, hatred of the self. Oh, yes. Big thing. Repressed anger is a neurotic syndrome. Remember, we talked about this tension, this conflict. So there'll be this love-hate dynamic, attraction, repulsion, all these neurotic traits which will handicap the child. And those are overlaid upon normal, what's called ontological dualisms, stuff you can't do anything about, right? Being born as a human being, there's already a dualism. And Freud knew all about that. All psychologists do. One of them, the most obvious, is the conscious unconscious.
Right.
You are born as a contrarium. You're born as right? That's ontological or fundamental, philosophical dualism. There's a tension already in what it means to be human, just by the dint of being masculine and feminine, having two hemispheres of the brain. You're already a divided being. The last thing we need is more fragmentation and more conflict on top of those, before a mind is even able to grasp the ambivalence of what it means to be human. But unfortunately, that's where we are, and therefore, becoming neurotic is more than likely, very, very likely to happen.
Yes. And neurotic, just so that we're on the same page, neurotic is like a rumination that happens psychologically, where somebody is basically, I would say, rolling over what is the problem, and it can be very internalized. Would that be fair to say, seeing oneself as the cause and needing to adjust. There's something wrong with me. I have to fix this. And maybe perhaps on a more esoteric level, this child being the product of the man and the woman, in an esoteric or like a hermetic sense, seeing the discord between the parents, it assumes that it is the cause on some level. Would that be fair to say that that might be roots of neuroticism, or am I off the mark on that?
Oh, it definitely does. And remember, parents are already, bad parents want to make people feel guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Each parent wants to make each other guilty, and a child can be swept up in that. And a child can feel responsible.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so this is interesting because I think about this neurotic suffering that we're seeing prevalent throughout our human culture right now. And we also at the same time see this rise in feminine power. More women are in positions of power. More and more women are going to college and becoming educated, where we see that in the opposite, men, the younger men, are struggling to be what would be seen in society as conventionally successful. And where I feel this might be linked, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this, is that it may be linked to that unaddressed form of violence that is a feminine covert violence, which it has more to do with crushing of the will in covert ways rather than just beating a person overtly, which can be seen as overt masculine violence. It seems that this manipulation of the will to feminize, in a sense, the child is causing an imbalance of power in a way where we are seeing many successful women, but they're successful in a way that's making them manly and not masculine. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what I'm sharing, if you have any insights into this.
Well, yeah, there's the dualism in the female kind, which has to do also with their own births and their own move up through puberty. And that is to, I would explain that looking more at a Jungian sort of paradigm, if you forgive me with that. It's the woman who is looking to the masculine solar world positively is one group. And they are looking through, or it's because of this thing called the ego ideal, in which they're looking for heroic, solar, patriarchal characters. And that's all very positive. They're the masculine woman who is trying to work with what Jung called their animus, because all women have the masculine within them. And that is just leading the way. And it will admire men, it will respect men, it will want to work alongside men, mostly equally. There's not too much rivalry. And if there is, it's a benign one. Hey, you compete with me, I compete with you, but we all have the same goal. And these can be, the broad-shouldered women, who try to get through the glass ceiling. They don't really look at themselves as women as opposed to men. They don't go for that. That's there a little bit. It's more that they want to be successful in sports, in journalism, in corporate America, right? Or wherever. They want to do well. They want to excel. Haven't they learned that from the male world? Of course they have, because that's the history of it. So a woman in the more modern age who's been studying mankind and seeing this claim of excellence and seeing creativity and building and construction and logic and light and order, what's wrong with that? But then you get the other kind of woman who has that's broken down. And it's a very, very interesting story, of course, why that does. Maybe we can get into that later. But when it breaks down, they then, from the Jungian aspect, are still animated by an animus, but it's a malignant one, or what I call a daimonic one. And this has to do with a lot of internal dynamics in which the woman has in some way violated her archetypal matrix. She's not integrated with her archetypes, but the anima, which would be feminine, and the animus. And so these archetypes then return in a kind of antagonistic manner. And this is where, for instance, to give you another example, thug love would come in. Why so many women in our society today go with bad boys. There's even a term for it, histobilia or something like that. I can send you the link later, where, the women who line up at prisons to have babies with serial killers and all this kind of nonsense, right? Now, those women might look like the first woman. I mean, cosmetically, they may look like they're business women and they want to work in the corporate solar world. But no, their agenda would be totally different. They want to get power within it so they can destroy it. And they are in competition with men. And it's become terribly rife. A lot of corporate executive men won't spend 5 minutes in a room alone on the corporate level with a secretary now, or with a co-worker if that woman is female. It's rampant, and there's a very good reason why this is. It's because these women have shown just how ruthless and horrible they are, trying to claim that they were sexually harassed and all this nonsense, right? They won't sit. A corporate executive will no longer sit next to them in an airplane, for instance. They have to get a seat completely. All this distancing that's taking place. Won't go to a bar, even just for a simple little drink, between conferences or whatever, or committee meeting. Not going to happen. Women have brought this on themselves by constantly violating. These are the kind of women we're talking about. So yes, there's this demonic animus, which unfortunately is running ragged. And since we're in a non-psychological culture, how's this ever going to get fixed? The focus is entirely on politics today. Because we're in a non-psychological society, it doesn't look like this is ever going to get fixed. And even though a lot of women are psychologists, well, a lot of men are psychologists, a lot of men are Jungians. When's the last time you saw a Jungian standing up and pointing any of this out? Books have been written, bestsellers have been written. It doesn't contain anything like this.
No, this is avoided completely.
Mm-hmm. It's Jungian, I'd spit on it. Laugh, just laughter, cosmic laughter. What because they're all woke as well. The one thing is that almost the entire psychiatric and psychological movements are utterly left-wing and woke. So don't hold your breath waiting for any of this to be ever addressed, but it is there. It's in the masters. And it's something I try to address a lot. But we go very deep into that in various podcasts I've done to find out why the malignant female becomes malignant. And that's to do with a dragon fight, which I call the dragon fight, which is to do with another word that might be new to people, matrophobia. Fear of the mother or hatred of the mother. That's where we would go to explore all of that.
This is a good segue here, but first I want to say that the work that you have done on Unslaved, your podcast on female psychology, is second to none. So if people want to go deeper into that, I highly recommend that they go to the Unslaved podcast. It's unslaved.com and sign up there. It is well worth your time if you really want to understand this stuff, because we're only seeing at best half of the story when it comes to root causal factors of what's going on in our society. And as Michael aptly pointed out, we are in an anti-psychological society. There, on the surface, we talk about mental health, but we are glossing over it with pills and remedies and distractions. We're not going to root causal factors. And if we don't go into that, we're not going to fix the problem. We need to look this stuff square in the face. And that means we need to go into the territory that can be the most painful to look at. And that is female psychology, both in women and in men. But in any case, you mentioned matrophobia. So I'd really like to go into that, because when you look up matrophobia online, the basic definition is a fear of becoming one's mother. But it seems there's so much more to it than that. Would you elaborate?
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, if people don't want to sign up right away, just go to dragonmother.org, and there's a lot of articles there for them to peruse to see the direction of what's going on. And some of them come from a Jungian point of view as well. So you'll learn a lot about Freud and Jung from reading those. But you're quite right. Well, the matrophobia is known, the Jungians know it as the Electra complex, which in itself was a kind of a version of Freud's Oedipal complex. You see, Jung was answering Freud. So it's Freud who started it. Freud started this, it became, wanted to delineate the first 7 years of life, which went through this thing he called the Oedipus complex, which is really Oedipal stages. There's about 5 of them: the oral, the anal, the genital, the phallic, and the latency where it ends. And for Freud, this was an important ladder or stages of psychosexual development because it ended in the creation of the superego, which is everything. Everything about our society today is wrapped up in that. But he didn't really isolate girls and boys. The Oedipus complex just went for both sexes. Along comes Jung and says, hey, I fault you for not spending more time to talk about the girl. And I want to do that. So he did a bit. I mean, it wasn't comprehensive. Neither of them really went into the depth that I do, but that's fine because they were interested in other things, right? So the Electra complex is the same thing, but for girls. And then along comes Otto Rank, who was secretary to Freud for 22 years. And he wrote a book called The Trauma of Birth. And he wanted to do one thing more than anything, and that is not to start the Oedipal stages at around 2 years of age. He wanted to go back into what then became called the semiotic level, which is almost from the moment of conception. The 9 months in the womb and the first year, and even more of birth. And Julia Kristeva, the feminist, was influenced by that. So she had interesting things to say about that. Barbara Creed, all these people I've covered, in my work on Enslaved, also picked up on that. Like, in other words, a few feminists also picked up on this, and had interesting things to say. But it comes out of Otto Rank saying, and even Stanislav Grof, some of them decided that, this period in the womb is crucial as well. Because although we can calculate it to be 9 months temporally, that's ridiculous. It's centuries of psychosexual development to the fetus. There's no months or days or weeks in that state. There's just this absolutely incredible, omnipotent plastic world, in which time itself is a meaningless concept. Maybe for the mother, but for the fetus, no. A lot of things are happening. It's entirely universal experience can happen in just that period. Mustn't be ruled out like Freud did. And then you go into the other stages, But again, coming to your point, I think it was Melanie Klein who came up with the term, metrophobia, And you're right, it's just that. But what it really signifies is what I call the dragon fight. And that is a 7-year long, and of course, absolutely it can continue into teenage years. I think it does. Conflict with the mother, who is an unworked person. The positive mother I refer to as the dragon mother, based on the old, motif. You and I have talked about this before, of the old encircling serpent symbol in its benign form, the old Ouroboros, as opposed to the terrible mother, who something breaks down. More than likely, it's because she herself was, the victim of a terrible mother. So then now comes a generational aspect. You see? Now that doesn't exonerate individual mothers who should be taking responsibility for that and doing the self-work before they breed. But nevertheless, it would be wrong to leave that out. Usually the terrible mother is herself a product of a terrible mother, and on and on and on it goes, right? If you've been nurtured by your mother and loved properly for yourself, not as an object, not as a toy, not as a crutch, and if she loved you as a being, not just because she wanted to feel what it was like to be a mom, which is what's happening rampantly all over the world, that's different. You're hardly going to go on and be malignant, are you? You'll probably be very adjusted. So yeah, there's this generational aspect also to bear in mind. But when it comes to the actual conflict between the two, oh my God, this is terrific. This is where one has to look at it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Freud, just to give you one little bit more piece of background on it, Freud believed that man was bestial in his origins and violent, and that civilization is the only thing that's keeping him from being this rapacious beast. So the acculturation is what he's looking for in a parent situation. He's looking for the necessary repression of these bestial traits. And for him and Melanie Klein and people like that, they would see sibling rivalry as an outbreak of the violence.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing bad in it, because they said that, well, that's what you are. They'd see a boy especially, smashing up his toys. I mean, how ubiquitous is that, right? We just bought you the toy yesterday and now it's smashed to pieces. They would look at that. Tics, shoving your hands into the pockets, bedwetting, teeth grinding, sniffing, even things like bad eyesight, cursing, all these bad habits that children pick up is all a sign of the, what they would call the bestial id, trying to break through. And then, on top of that comes the forces of civilization to try to knock that out of you. And of course, in those days, because this was the standard belief, then it was thought that very severe parenting was justified. And it is sometimes took on a tragic authoritarian, there's no doubt about that, right? That in the past, schooling and boot camp and what are these things, would have been seen as quite severe. But you can understand it, because they thought that man is a beast. And that all of this stuff leading up to your teenage years, where you become openly delinquent and openly violent and loud and foul with tattoos and piercings and all the whole shebang of it. But even those little infantile ones that I taught, banging the spoon, throwing down the bowl, would have told a Freudian, you say, well, we keep telling you. And therefore the civilizing effects are needed. So in the same way, coming back to the point of matrophobia, the girl goes through a process in which, this only happens with a toxic parent, by the way, in which at a very, very young age, her identity and her will and are being subverted or crushed by the terrible mother. They're being subverted. That's what it's about. And this is when the personality of the mother is trying to erase the girl's identity. Now, you're very young, so most of this isn't even received consciously. When you talk to women today, they don't even know what you're talking about, because that comes now at a later stage. And so what happens is, by the time, but before the superego is created, because the superego is going to be hugely important in this process, but in 7 years of this exposure to a terrible mother, through potty training, through all of it, in fact, from even breastfeeding, think about that. Oh, no, what do we say? Go back, like Julia Kristeva and others did. This, not even just the physical suckling. What about her thoughts in the womb? What about your mother's autolog? You think the child wasn't susceptible? Shit, they know. Even today, conventionally, the pediatricians know with their new machinery that the child is soaked in it. They know it. They absolutely know it. There's lots of science out there. So for 7 years, this act of master-slave goes on. And what it does is it breeds, you talked earlier about legitimate suffering as opposed to neurotic misery. This is where this really comes in, because all of this bad treatment breeds legitimate anger. In fact, it's really rage. The ones who speak about it, it's rage. It's childhood rage. Hence, again, the smashing up of toys, the disobedience, the talking back and stealing, or all the things that kids might get up to, all the antics. It's coming out, it's leaking out, but we airbrush that, right? We try to pretend we don't know its roots. We just call the kid delinquent and have done with it. But again, this is a legitimate emotion. So by the time, it's legitimate rage, it's legitimate resentment. Now, would be fine, because it's legitimate. That's what the word means. But the trouble is that by 7 years of age, we develop this thing called the superego. And this is where everything then goes wrong. Because the superego is actually the embodiment of the parental imagos in your own being. In other words, there's a part of us that introjects the images of our parents, called the imagos. Because there's another part of the superego or ego called the ego ideal that scans the world for heroes. We're all born with it. And the first people are what I call, the twin peaks, are the parents. And so we try to install them as heroic. Now, usually they're not heroic. So this is already where there's going to be problems, right? But the superego's function goes beyond that. And what it does is, because it has embodied the parents in your head, it is the faculty that suppresses that legitimate rage we just talked about. Because it's the inner parent that says, no, no, no. We're going to flood you with guilt if you dare express legitimate emotions towards your parents. It becomes taboo. So you have their external prohibition, which is frightening enough to keep you silent. And now you've got that tyrant in the head. Unbelievable. Jung would say this is part of your shadow. Right? We don't want to jump too into that, take us in a slightly different direction. But this would be part of the shadow work. The shadow would be legitimate emotions that now get suppressed. And that's what makes up the shadow. Right? See, so there's a Jungian parallel here. So, but keeping along more the sort of quasi-Freudian description, the child now suppresses, represses this legitimate rage. Now, a lot of things will make sense because we're looking not to just the psychology, but how it might affect the world that we're living in. Well, this will help right now if people understand that what we call repression, you can use the synonym oppression. Except it's called repression because it's you doing it to yourself. Oppression is always when somebody else is doing it to you, right? And repression and suppression, these now mean something you're doing to yourself. But you know something? No, the difference between those two words is very thin, actually. The semantics aside, what you're doing is a form of oppression. One part of you, i.e. the superego, is oppressing another part of yourself. Talk about a contrarian, talk about a state of apartheid. Now, my message is simple. Michael Tsarion's message is simple. Even up to the dynamic I've just mentioned, if that is true, and it is, how the hell are you going to expect that type of divided being, stewing with rage that he can't even express, going to enter the political world and fix things for others?
Well, it's a really good question.
Anybody selling that up to us? Yeah. The whole world. The whole political world is filled with constitutional psychological inferiors, convinced that they're going to change the world because they care about other people and minorities and whatever the hell it is. And women now play a bigger role in that. Do you think I'm impressed? Look, it doesn't take to be a rocket scientist with a high IQ to work that out. Somebody who is this conflicted inside, riddled with resentment, paralyzed with rage, that they're not even aware of consciously. Oh, and in fact, the moment that it might even leak out, something within you floods you with guilt.
Yep, literally.
So much. So this is called adultism, in which the parent outside prohibits and the parent inside is the superego, and this is the dynamic. But it doesn't end there. If I may continue, then I'll bring up something else.
Please go on. Yes.
Because this will have a lot to do with feminism, which is the outcome of all of this, the dragon fight. So in the middle of this paralyzing, poisonous environment that the daughter carries within her, and she's got a big Prozac smile because none of this is consciously known. But all the trouble is she is bulimic, she is anorexic, She has all these breakouts. Fuck, the eyesight's terrible. She's really awkward. Might even have a stammer or stutter. Has got no self-esteem. All of these neurotic traits are, emanating from this poisonous soil. But she doesn't know. No, nobody can work out where it's all coming from. Even the local doctor, just take more pills, it's fine. We'll give you a few more injections, everything will be all right.
Mm-hmm.
Out of this comes to lessen the tension, because this becomes unbearable by about 7 up to 10. That all these teen suicides, girl suicides now that are happening, and they think it's social media that's causing it. Well, it's social media is involved in it, yeah, but it's not causing it. So in the child, there has to be a valve. There has to be some way of mitigating against this horrific matrophobia. And what amazing thing, the superego's second function, then you could look at it this way, is to start identifying with the object of your hate. Psychologists know about this. Happens with men too, right?
Oh, yes.
But instead of hating the mother in an open way, although there are some girls who do that, and I think that's much, much, much more healthy to do that, just to break away from them and realize their limits and go, what the fuck, I'm off, do something different. Or pick another female hero and, a grandmother, an auntie, or somebody in the media that you like better. Something positive like that, a female archetype. No, most of the girls don't go down this route. They're riddled with matrophobia, eaten up by it. But the superego has the resolution and catches you in the net of this, which is that now you start to identify with this colossal power of the Medusan mother. Because remember, in the 7 years, you have been royally treated to a drama in which this big-booted, scimitar-wielding, crazy Medusa has been crushing your will and identity. And in a strange way, you start to identify with its power, even though you're also repulsed by that power. But the trouble is, you're victimized by that power. No one knows its power better than you. And so there's a certain mechanism that is now going to become the center of your consciousness, which is to identify with the power of the tyrant. And this starts about 7 years of age, because before that, the superego isn't developed enough. Now, a terrible mother will also sense this in many cases and realize what's going on. Oh, yeah, because they're much older than you and they're smarter. And they know that their crimes have been registered on some level, because they're kind of, maybe they're even slightly guilty of it, of all the bad things that they've done to you and the terrible control. So then what they do is they play bait and switch with you. They catfish you by saying, well, now that you've obeyed me and you're a good girl, I will share some of my Medusan power with you when the time comes. And the superego latches on to that and goes, see, it's all been worth it. Suppress that hatred, shove it into the dark corners of the world, because your mom is ready to share with you, young lady. You will get this boon. It's all nonsense, of course, right? But this is a way we have to mitigate against the first aberration. Now, where do we see this? Where's the evidence? The mother has no power to give you, but what she might do is use your sexuality over the young girl, especially a pretty girl, and say, I'll teach you how to use seduction. You'll be powerful. You're gorgeous. And now starts another door thrown open of a girl to the world of the lie. Doll yourself up, right? Start fucking, and by this time you're in school, surrounded by boys, right? Okay, mama, you have jumped through her hoops. You've tolerated her lashing tongue, her whips, her scimitars, her blows, but it's all right. It's all right. You sit down in front of the mirror and you get ready to get out there and wield that sexual power. And girls just do it. Look at the implications of this. So the girl now becomes a sexual deviant, sexual seductress, right? In order to vehicleize this monstrous hatred that has been, now it's a contract. I'll suppress that. I'll forget that it exists. And then there's another syndrome too. With this identification with the mother and her power, in another mechanism that the superego comes up with to blanket this intense rage, you start to identify it with all things female. So then comes, if you ever notice that men don't squeal about lionizing, exalting, and idealizing manhood as much as the feminists do it to womankind. Where does this all come from? Right? That just by being the dint of being a woman suddenly has made you like a goddess level. Women idealizing women. This is where it comes from. It's born out of matrophobia, but it's the opposite. It's what Freud called a compensation.
Mm.
In order to mask from yourself your deep antagonism towards women, kind, and mother, you now develop a compensatory idealization of all things female. Now, remember earlier we talked about thug love. You can't idealize the feminine without at the same time demonizing the masculine. What better way to justify your demonization of the masculine than to surround yourself by aberrant masculine, by aberrant males? Do you see the dynamic what the girl is doing?
So creating an environment where they're basically proving their theory.
That's it. Self-justifying. It's all done by the superego. If I bring bastards, criminals, and murderers around me that I secretly know are scumbags and probably going to end up in fucking jail, I can sit back and say, see, these men are just rubbish. And that comes with the territory when what you're really doing is answering your matrophobia, but through this convoluted manner, by exalting all things feminine. We know that as feminism. It's bankrupt. The women in feminism hate their mothers. But most of these women that we're calling feminists are psychologists. Have a laugh at that. That's a squeal. And yet they don't know anything about what we're talking about, for the most part. You can't find anyone who does.
No.
You can get close, but close is not good enough for what we need. The Julia Kristevas, the Barbara Creeds, a little bit of Karen Horney, a little bit of Alice Miller. Yeah, it's out there, but it hasn't reached anything like the proportions, And I do mention these women in my works, the ones who come close.
Well, quick question, just to interject. Are there any women, though, in the last 15 years even, that you could name who are coming out with this information?
No, Alice Miller is the best.
Fair enough.
Alice Miller, Karen Horney. Karen Horney is probably one of the greatest psychologists who ever lived. Melanie Klein. Towering over them all is Ayn Rand, of course, but she's not a psychologist, she's a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
So women who would be interested in mixing all of this, everything we're talking about in a nutshell, they just go, is there one way to cut through this all in a Gordian knot? Yeah, it's called Ayn Rand. Very, very simple. So read her philosophy and the rest is history. You're done. But nobody wants to do that, so we're in the mix, we're in the mess. Yeah, you have others, but those ones I've mentioned probably. Camille Paglia is definitely worth reading.
She was the one, did she write the one, Women's Inhumanity to Women? Is that the same
one? Sorry, that's Phyllis Chesler.
Oh, sorry, I got her confused. Okay.
Very good book, yes. And that reminds me of even Esther Villar.
Mm-hmm.
Esther Villar, The Manipulated Man. Oh, we can definitely get a list together. Esther Villar, Phyllis Chesler, Women's Inhumanity to Women, fantastic work. I've done several podcasts on her, diving deeply into her work. Yeah, but Karen Horney, a psychologist of the top level. Melanie Klein for children. Anna Freud would be important too. Sigmund Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, even though she was a left-wing socialist. I go where I need to, right? There's some fantastic works. If you're hungry for knowledge, then left-wing, right-wing doesn't matter. Catholic, Protestant doesn't matter. Man, woman doesn't matter. You go where the knowledge is, right? So yeah, we've covered that. So the sexuality, which is rife, you see, of course. Now, of course, the masculine woman doesn't do any of those things. First of all, she's not trying to. First of all, she doesn't identify with the object of her hate. Hate is hate. I'm not identifying with it. I loathe it. I hate the way my mother wielded her, staff or stick. I hate her looks. I hate her smell. I don't want nothing to do with her. She's a horrible person. I'm cordial when we meet, but I don't want to be like her. I haven't identified with her. I don't identify with tyrannical power. Oh, and I don't then sit there saying, create a contract where you'll give me a measure or you'll promote a measure of power, so I go out there and ruin men's lives by my sexuality. I'm not doing that. I would loathe a woman or a man who tried that on me. And by the way, if I do happen to be gorgeous, I'll use that. I'll use my sexuality to lead men up.
Oh, right? Can I interject with this? Actually, this brings it into a really good spot. Sorry. It's just, I really want to talk about the concept of biophilia versus necrophilia. Is it okay if we go in that direction?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to define the terms because I'm sure that a lot of people who listen to this won't know what biophilia and necrophilia is. Could you describe that? And then maybe what we could go into is just, what is a biophilous woman and what is a necrophilous woman? Because we're not seeing biophilia, I feel, in women, and they want to be beautiful. I think they're synonymous, and when you define it, I'm sure there may be a link here, but to me, beauty, biophilia are intrinsically linked, but we're seeing a lot of this necrophilous and it's glamour. So there's a difference where I see necrophilia and glamour, but beauty and biophilia together. And I'm just wondering if maybe we could go into that direction with the time we have, because I just want to make sure I'm getting the most with, it's always a treat and a privilege to talk to you. So I want to make sure I squeeze as much juice out of the lemon as I can. Can we go in that direction?
Sure. Everything we've been talking about is the necrophilous woman. Mm-hmm. And most women today, the feminist movement is entirely necrophilous without any shadow of doubt. And most women today who buy into it are necrophilous. It means lovers of death, lovers of that which nature doesn't want, doing things aberrant to nature. You see, when you envy man for his strength, endurance, and power, you're envying nature, because nature has endowed man with those traits, just like he's endowed woman. Nature has endowed woman with her traits. Man may build a house, but the woman will decorate it inside and look after it. It's win-win, right? Man may kill the chicken, but who's going to prepare it? The woman. But when that breaks down, all this feminist hatred of man, as we already said, it's not hatred of man at all, it's hatred of mother, but it's in disguised form through a very circuitous route. That's necrophilous. Because remember, the terrible mother is the embodiment of the necrophilous energy. She first tyrannized you. She abused you. She hung over you the carrot, of beauty as power. And I must add one thing, you see. There's a breakdown in this. What about the girl who isn't that beautiful? Doesn't realize it yet, but when she gets to be 7 to 10 to 12 and she's online, she realizes that my mom can't promise me the sexual power because I'm not attractive to men. Oh, I've been fucking had. The one thing that made it okay was this promise that my mom said, you got tits, right? You'll be able to go out there and fucking seduce men. But then I realized that I'm not one of these 8, 9s, and 10s. Oh, I've been had by my mother. So the rage quotient now leaps up even more. Plus the frustration that the reality principle brings you to say, I can't wield that power. That girl can. What do you think happens next? I said that women Everything that constitutes what we've talked about is women hating women. But it's covered over by a blanket opposite. It's blanketed by the opposite. The girl who is not attractive to men, who bought this lie, hates woman even more. She hates the good-looking woman. What is the feminist movement full of? You see them hopping down the street half naked, right? You see them every day with their blue hair. It's the unattractive females, right? Bloated, blank stares, full of hate. They've directed it to man. Man is not even close. That's been my message. They are not interested in what men do. They're necrophilous. They're irritated by something that's absolutely got to do with this dragon fight. But when they play it out in the world, in the circus of the world, right, it takes on this different complexion that everybody falls for. But when you study the female psyche, you know this got nothing to do with it, nothing at all. And the woman, I wouldn't call them ugly, but I'm just saying the less handsome woman now develops a new syndrome that she despises. This is because you have to be in school by this time, so you can take your pick. When is that? She despises the good-looking woman who she believes did inherit the power from her mother, and I didn't. So the next thing you know, it's fucking piercings, it's the dyed hair, right? It's the sweaty armpits, it's the rainbow t-shirt and all the rhetoric that comes with it. It's like, just buy it from Toys R Us and plug it in, making yourself look hideous. They've got these side-by-side pictures, don't they? You've seen them. Everybody has. Of a gorgeous little girl who the next minute looks like something from a, horror movie, all the piercings and everything like that. And you can't believe, is this the same girl we're talking? Yeah. Why does it happen only at that age? Because now they are crying with hatred that they bought a lie, that the power that they sacrificed all of this for isn't theirs, but these cute girls have it. So the rage is between girl and girl. Where does man fit into any of that? Nowhere. The woman A is fighting woman B, saying, I wish I had the power you have. In fact, this is so bad, this is what's creating the suicides that nobody seems to be able to answer what the cause is. I can answer it. By 10 and 12 and 11 has skyrocketed girls committing suicide. This is I'm just giving you the reason right now. But so all of what we're talking about is necrophilous. And the biophilic, which hardly exists, is the lover of life and the lover of creativity. Now, the one consequence of this is very, very important. Because I've said in other work that the masculine patriarchal world that always gets the blame, actually on the psychological level that we are talking about, is a solar world that becomes a haven for the girl or boy that's been oppressed by the terrible mother or the terrible parent. A haven. Because nothing could be as bad as this lunar, Stygian abyss that you have to endure. So, but what happens to that wonderful, orderly, lit world that we call the solar patriarchal world? If over time it becomes flooded with these unworked necrophilous people, then unfortunately, and this is why I do my work now today, is because the so-called solar world is becoming less solar by the day. You get all these beta men and simps proving this point. So the difference with the 21st century is the solar world is becoming more and more lunarized as these unworked necrophilous people flood it. Oh dear. Is that what Freud meant in his last book, Civilization and Its Discontents, when he said, your civilization, for all it's good, is terminal anyway? It's only a temporary cap on the bestial instincts? Is this guy going to turn out to be right? But in the phraseology I use now, the solar world is becoming less and less solar. Things are darkening because, the lunar ones from below are coming up into it, but they're unworked and they're bringing their Stygian nightmare with them. That's why more and more men are becoming homosexual and hipsters, millennials, all of these types. They're not masculine anymore. The animus is no longer the animus. So that means our societies are becoming more and more necrophilous. The invasion of foreign types from breaking in through our borders, and that doesn't help either. That's only going to make the problem even worse. In fact, from a psychological point of view, that's why that's happening, because something in the body politic has become weak to let it happen. It's this ultra feminization we've been describing. Now, the masculine woman is biophilous because she appreciates creativity and the men who go around doing the creativity, and she wants to be part of it. And that's called what Freud called penis envy. Penis envy is nothing sinister at all. It's just the simple identification of a girl with the solar world. And she finds it a place that's more airy, more sunny, and more orderly. And it's a breather from this horrible Stygian nightmare of the lunar world in which the terrible mother has been sucking her power. And that's not to say that the solar world, patriarchal world, doesn't have its problems. Yes, it does. And the original feminist movement was a group that tried to fix some of it. I'm for that. Nothing wrong with it. Until it got, weaponized by the Grand Orient Freemasons and a lot of other sinister characters. It's really a group called the Fourth Sect. These are ancient socialists who knew to use women's psychology, as a doomsday weapon for their agenda, and women just fell right into it. And the women do not know anything about their own psychology only makes it even worse. So
Right.
a lot of the things I work, write and do is for women to upgrade. They're not, because that would be brilliant. That would be really, really something to really turn the tide. So that's what I've dedicated myself to.
And I greatly appreciate it personally. I came across Dragon Mother at this point, about 5 years ago, and it had such an impact on my life. I mean, I was already somebody who was on the path of individuation and working through, just my own, how I've been conditioned by the myth, wealth, by society, working through that. But what really brought it together was your works on female psychology, your podcasts on female psychology, your book, Dragon Mother, Adultism, these kinds of books, because there's things that we need to look at as women to understand how we contribute. And so, like with the necrophilous side of things, just to contribute to what you shared, like being a masculine woman doesn't mean being a butch. Just to be clear to everybody who's listening, it's not about being a manly woman. It's about being a woman who is feminine, but using her masculinity in a beautiful way, in a way that is, ingenious and courageous, but also, taking initiative and being an individual, right? It's not about melding into, we could say, like a macro version of what was happening on the micro level with the mother's manipulation of your will. Like in our society, it's basically a macro version of that manipulation, where if you exhibit your individuality, your masculinity, your courage, your initiative, you can be punished. But can we see how that's wrong? For us to change this society for women, part of the process, and like I'll get off my soapbox in a sec because this is an interview for Michael, but I just want to add this, is just that we need to look at where we are necrophilous. Where are we choking out life? Where are we trying to suppress the wills of other people because we think we know what's right? Where are we not listening and actually hearing and actually seeing other people for who they are and giving them the respect they're due? This makes me think about, like, I had a list of questions here as we were talking about this concept of biophilia and necrophilia, and we see so much androgyny in this world right now. From an evolutionary standpoint, I can see how we can be moving to wanting to integrate our masculine and feminine sides, but it does seem that effort on a natural level is being co-opted. And what we see in the androgyny in men and women seems to be an aberration. I'm wondering if maybe you'd like to speak on your perspective on that and maybe what knowledge you can bring forward on that.
Yeah, again, I would look at sort of a Jungian point of view, really. It's something that came out of the East a lot, the merging of Shiva and Shakti, the Hieros Gamos came out of alchemy. I think its secret has kind of largely been lost. It's something to do with ancient Tantra, and but the way that's come down to us has been very, very mutilated. And the women's movement, of course, will always use it for gynocracy, for female supremacy. Uh, this fake New Age movement, who always talk about a goddess tradition, is one of the most bogus things. I did a program called The Hebrew Goddess, and I ended it just a few weeks ago, showing how ludicrous this concept was. But at the same time, there must be an element of truth in it, because in the old Egyptian legend mythos, you had the sky god, the goddess Nuth, and you had the earth goddess Jeb, and he was phallic. And you see one above the other. The goddess would be arched across the heavens and the earth god below. And obviously there was a conjunctionis involved. There was a sort of a cosmic mating. So they had it. And it's just about the elements coming together, opposites coming together. Something that they had in their mythology. Then you get it in terms of the quaternity, which turns up in every tradition. That's a fourfold unification. And that would hail to the elements, fire, water, air, earth, coming together as one. And that would be the quintessence, or the fifth essence. And that's a kind of a androgyny, a biounity. As I said, you get the Shiva Shakti. In alchemy, you get the king and the queen coming together at the end. Is that sulfur and mercury, or what other iteration? You get the lion and the unicorn. There's all sorts of symbols of the duad finally collapsing into each other. And it has been used as an ancient mystery. Now, on the other side, though, it seems hard for us to conceive. And maybe that's all it was. It was a mental image alone as a meditation tool. And that it's wrong to think of it as being an actual physical, reality. It may be something like Plato's forms. It may be something transcendental. Sorry, that's the wrong word, transcendent. It may be a transcendent motif that, can be used when, like in sacred geometry, when you draw the two circles, right, to make the Vesica Pisces, those two circles coming together. So this could be something that is symbolic. And then when you go into the Jungian thing, it sort of gives us an insight, because you have anima and you have animus. And it's quite logical to see them coming together at a certain point, which would be balance. And many of the Jungians have talked about that. That's the Hieros Gamos. That's what he called the Mysterium Conjunctionis. But wait a minute, there's 13 archetypes. The animus and the animus are not the only archetypes. There's 13 in all, including the shadow. So how do you integrate 13 archetypes? I mean, that's obviously impossible, even by the Jungian description, because a man or woman, will always be controlled more or less by one archetype at a time, with other ones being sort of there, but they may be supplementary. But that means they're not unified. So suddenly there's a conflict. I can see that two archetypes could be united together, brought to harmony. But how could 13 archetypes be brought to harmony? So there seems to be a conflict here. If I'm a whole psyche, a whole being, then all the knights at the table must come together, right? Not two. But it seems then preposterous that in one life I could be that balanced. The wild man, the orphan, the magician, the warrior, the king, all the archetypes, the shadow, all of them are going to be in perfect harmony. I mean, come on, we're talking nonsense. Can't happen. So then why select two and say, no, they can be brought to harmony? It just doesn't seem congruous, really, when you really do a deep dive into it, right? It could be, I may be wrong. Something I may be missing. And no doubt there are times in your life where there is a feeling of balance and harmony. But can that be lifelong? Can that be, something that you experience all the time? You see, these are questions each person has to. But when you read Jung, you're reading something that could look contradictory. A person is ruled or dominated their consciousness by one archetype at a time. Right now, it's the warrior, I feel, or the animus, or next minute it's the magician, or the next minute it's the wanderer, or at this period of my life I'm the orphan, or now I'm possessed by the anima. I feel that coming through. But we're not talking about balance. So I wonder, is there a clash somewhere? Did some traditions get sort of smushed together that shouldn't really be together? I got deeper questions. I'm not totally a buyer. I just don't believe straight away in some of these esoteric principles. They come out of left field. They don't quite make sense. Look at the Kabbalistic tree of life. There's 10 different levels. That's just for starters. Some trees of life have 11 centers. In the chakra system, you've got 7. In the Enneagram, you got 9. In the Tarot, you've got, 36 or 22. In astrology, you've got the 12. I mean, look, what's going on here?
Yeah, and even in the astrology, I mean, I've been looking at the asteroids because so many of them are named after mythological beings. And if you think about how many asteroids are named, the numbers go into the tens of thousands at this point. So really, it can become quite nebulous.
Yes, there's been an attempt in Kabbalah and astrology. Obviously, there are polarities. Each sign faces the opposite element.
Yes.
All the way around the zodiac, right? In the Kabbalah, it's the same. The Sephirot are balanced by male and female. So it's definitely there. But it's not just 2, So, yeah, it's odd. So what I think is that it's a sexual symbol. It's a psychosexual symbol. It has some sort of numinous meaning. I think what it's doing is it is attracting our attention to the underlying, what I call contrarian. That is a fundamental dualism in the world. That's what I think it was originally, in its pure sense, the androgyne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you think about the goddess traditions, like we hear a lot of people talk about the transition period from the matrilineal periods into the patriarchal period, for instance. I mean, if we think of that from the concept of very long-standing ages, we can see the pendulum swing in a very slow manner. Of course, we can see it happening in many other situations at a more rapid pace. But yeah, I mean, maybe I'm not on the same page with you, but that's what I feel like you're saying, that there's this rhythmic cycle that is happening, kind of like a lemniscate, process that's constantly happening. I wonder if that applies with what you're.
Yeah. See, remember, if you look at the tarot cards, if you look back into the mythology at the time when the female cults were dominant, I'm not talking about a matriarchy here. I think that's been overblown, but there definitely were power cults that women were part of. They always had the male totem near them, a lion, a young bull, a cub, even a serpent. Okay? That was her child lover. That was her son lover. Aphrodite and Eros, Cybele and Attis, Isis and Horus, right? Goes on and on and on. In fact, Jehovah was originally the consort of Asherah. Can you believe that, right? Before he got pumped up to be the top god. But you even had Baal and Asherah before that. So this was the concept of biunity, in which there was the supreme goddess, and then there was her agent. This does go back very, very far. It goes back into the Paleolithic. But as I say, I think that all these ancient races, without fail, were preoccupied by this underlying, what I call contrarian. I have an article on michaeltsarion.com for people who never heard of this, right? Just go to contrarian article. This primal dualism. They were fascinated by it. That's how you get yin yang. It's one of the most famous images of it, right? But the Hieros Gamos is as well. The chemical wedding is as well. It's all over the fucking place, right? The eclipse between the luminaries, the sun and the moon, Mercury and sulfur, like I said, in alchemy, the two lovers. So it's everywhere. But I think it just fundamentally represented in pictorial form their fascination with this primal duad, this primal dualism, that everything came out of. It's called dialectical monism.
Mm.
And because it is in the physical act of sex, it did preoccupy their minds. They saw this as a huge motif, and that's where it came from.
Okay, fair enough. And I so to wrap things up, maybe just a couple more questions. I'm wondering, all of this, because a lot of these root causes, like if we go back into the ages and the generations far, far back, we can start seeing when we look at, like you've mentioned, like these dualities, these duads, how they play into what's unfolding in the present day. If we look at that, we see that there's not a lot, like you mentioned, we at the beginning of the interview, we're very much in an anti-psychological age, and it's very much an anti-psychological culture. And the effects of that are creating what we can see as the mental illness, the psychological illness, even like the soul level illness is rife throughout humanity. And yet the causes seem to be ignored. And I guess where I'm trying to go with this is, given the situation, I'm wondering, are there solutions? Is there a solution here? And, since we're focusing on women, I'd like to know, what can women do to help and actually really push, like get the needle to move on making a shift towards a more healthy biophilous society for not just their inner world, but for the as a contributor to our world as a human collective?
Well, the first thing to do, you see, would be to study the dragon fight, realize the points we've been making here, and start to do the shadow work, which unpacked just simply means confrontation with the rage, so that they can undermine this mechanism of the superego. And to unravel it, you have to back engineer it. And that means each individual woman starting to look at her ailments, starting to look at her teenage situation, and if she had a bad mother relationship, to start looking into it. Read my books, go browse the articles, get into it. If they have man hate, if they've been riddled with it, try to deconstruct that, see if it's really legitimate. And do the homework. Men have got their, journey to go on to work things out. And the woman has as well. And to realize that men are not against them. Men have never been against them. Men have done every single thing that they do is for the sake of woman, to make her life more comfortable, to even just impress women, right? Which has served women, hasn't it? Right? So they're not in competition with women, never have been. And the forces that have oppressed women in the past have also oppressed men. So that brings up a conspiratorial type of study, doesn't it? About who are the real world controllers. But see, I'm maintaining that those same world controllers that you're meant to hate are using women. The world that they want, this lunarized, necrophilous world, will hurt women just as much as it's going to hurt men. But women will have more guilt because they, were mobilized by it. So women have to do a lot of work. But get into your Phyllis Cheslers, get into your Esther Villars, get into your Camille Pallias, get into some of the people we mentioned, the Alice Millers. Voraciously, read that, learn. And don't then continue being necrophilous by breeding children that are necrophilous who will go in to poison the solar world. That's all that's been happening for decades now. The women are responsible for creating the aberrant necrophilous children who are entering into the solar world as a plaything. Don't love it for itself. It's not loved for itself. It's loved as a haven. It's loved as a temporary balm away from the Stygian abyss but it's not loved for itself. In fact, now it's not loved at all. That's why they can run around with their megaphones and their placards. You've seen this phenomena where they throw buckets of paint over the beauty. Remember, I just said that less beautiful women will hate the beautiful woman?
Yeah.
They hate anything that's beautiful. Who would throw a bucket of paint over a beautiful landscape or a painting? Except people caught in the very syndrome I'm talking about. Tomorrow, ugly girls are going to be throwing spray paint on beautiful women in the streets. It's going to just wait. You're sitting at Starbucks, and the next thing you know, some overweight loser is chucking a bucket of paint or hot coffee on your fucking face. We're not that far away, believe you me. And people like me just sit back and say, there, I told you. Can you explain that? Can anybody in the world explain? Well, we have no explanation for that. Because if you're having 10-year-old girls committing suicide just because they see cuter girls on TikTok, then don't tell me we're far away from what I've just said, or for even a worse aberration. Look at who's that blonde model they were all just screaming about recently? Who
Oh,
did the
Sydney Sweeney, I think is her name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that was?
What
All
was
the
that?
haters. What do you think that was? All the haters hating on her online.
Yeah.
It's a version of what I just said. She didn't say anything. Didn't do anything that anybody should have paid the slightest bit of attention. Just a fucking bimbo, that's all. But look what happened. The hate, you see, poured out against her, physical beauty. Is an example of exactly what I'm saying. In the movies, the way they're scripting movies for actresses who should never even be seen on a fucking screen, let alone on the covers of magazines. That's all necrophilous. And you know who's behind it. People whose own psychology, you see, is utterly aberrant. So women are the ones who are more hesitant when it comes to getting into the conspiratorial sort of, as an aside here, can mention it. Well, that's going to have to change. This was a men thing, in the past. Women are very hesitant to believe that there's a world conspiracy. They don't write books on it, don't speak about it. It's a bit better now, but not much. Well, why not? You know that most housewives don't give a shit about it. They sit and watch their sitcoms all day, being programmed up the gazoo. They don't know anything about what's happening. They're so close-minded, they won't, and if you come on and start talking about it, they don't want to know. They curse you out as being a racist or something like that, or a white supremacist or something like that. That you're a kook. So there's a lot of work for women to do, but of course, I would prefer that they would deal strictly with this problem of the matrophobia. And from that, lots of other things then will, untie. Lots of other things will heal once you go to this real poison in the blood. And then you don't have to then go around and micromanage, put out all the bushfires, right? Once you deal with this central problem, a lot of other things will, of their own, naturally get sorted, especially the way that children are being brought up. See, because that's a big problem right now. And what parents are doing is blaming the school teachers are blaming the parents, some people bring the trade unions and the government, blah, blah, blah. It keeps going round and round. But there's much more to it than that. There's a good book out, None Dare Call It Education by John Stormer. People should pick that up. But we have John Taylor Gatto. We have a lot of good works that are out there now on education. So there's been manuals written. Highly recommend all of that. People are even into homeschooling, which is problematic, but still probably better than, there's new options that didn't exist before.
Yeah, there are a lot more options. And one thing I want to add too is, a lot of as you mentioned, a lot of this stuff happens at an early age, that women are taught, like young girls are taught this hatred, this self-hatred. And one of the things about beauty, at least from my perspective is that, yes, we can have physical beauty, but the beauty that endures, so when you're 90 years old, you're still radiant, is a beauty that can only come from developing like biophilia, true beauty, a desire to see life, a desire to want to see others live and be alive and tune into their virility and their vitality, including yourself, your own virility and vitality. So like, I just wanted to say this because, this is an issue where women are conditioned to feel very ugly, and that their beauty is on a like a clock, and then eventually it will disappear. But that's a lie. That's something that if we buy into, that can be such an Achilles heel to our efforts to change things. And like, if someone even is unconventionally or considered conventionally ugly, I've seen women who would be considered that, who are radiant, because they didn't buy into the lie and they decided to love anyway. So, I just want to add that there's a lot of lies going around for us that fool us into going in the opposite direction, in a necrophilous direction. We can't fall for that. Like, we
And it
can't
is
fall for that. So
and
please
it
go
is
ahead.
oh, it is also necrophilous for the beautiful women I talked about to misuse beauty. Having been endowed with that power, they're just as necrophilous when they go around and misuse it. We forgot to mention that. I have no lover of those women.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Their beauty should be used biophilously. They get the attention. They are the clickbait. They are the ones that men will look up to, then use it for spiritual purposes. But none of them are doing it. You see, so yeah, the less good woman is burning with hatred against the beautiful woman. That's her neurosis. But the beautiful woman is not off the hook. She's no paragon. In fact, she may be doing even more damage because she has taken the bait. She does believe that this is an extension of her mother's necrophilous power. She has identified with the tyrant and becomes one, except this time it's one, that is aesthetically pleasing to look at. Therefore, all the more dangerous. She's the femme fatale. Nothing is more lethal on this planet, and nothing can be used for evil more than it can. Go back to your film noirs. Go back to your, mythologies of the femme fatale. That beauty is given to you as an endowment from the divine, so that you can lead your followers to the divine, not away from it, not into sexual malaise. And it's the same for a beautiful man, right? Androgynous man. They're endowed with something that's actually holy and should be used for that. They should be teachers. They should be way showers. They should be the philosopher class, because they've already been endowed with something, that's attractive, that will get hordes of people following them. They have a personality and charm and a way about them. But most women are not even conscious of that. They end up using it for lower purposes, and they will then bear the shame of that. They'll bear the guilt of that, because we talked about the superego. That's a moral center, but it's a moral center that is articulated to the world, right? To these physical imagos and to the world's needs. But every human being has a second moral center called the conscience. And the conscience is the moral center that is really the supervening one. It's another voice in the head. And this time it doesn't flood you with guilt. It floods you with shame for living the inauthentic life. So each of the descriptions we've given, each of the personality types we've described, in their necrophilous traits, each of those people, like, let's go back to the first example. The girl who identifies with the object of her hate is also filled with shame for doing so. It runs parallel. It comes along as part of the package. The girl who refuses, right, to identify and has the legitimate suffering and works with the legitimate suffering, but doesn't exalt the mother, doesn't think of her a source of legitimate power, and doesn't crave after her power, she's not filled with shame. The shame level is way down. But in the women who do any of these aberrant things, like identifying with the tyrant that takes the bait of, I want her power, I want a measure of her power, I'm going to, the conscience now starts to also flood that person's psyche with shame. And this is where we went back to the beginning, the legitimate side. These are legitimate emotions. So then I have a larger critique of psychology and psychiatry that people who, support my work, they know about it, they've heard about it, which is, why would we want to go to a psychologist or even psychiatrist to get rid of legitimate misery? I thought we were only meant to go to the experts to get rid of the neurotic version. But as I maintain in my work, no. The vast majority of people who go to see psychiatrists are troubled not by their neurotic misery, but by the welling up of shame and legitimate anxieties. They're going there for the pill, the red pill, the happy pill, the Prozac, to say, doctor, help me suppress legitimate emotions that are arising to keep me human. So when you look at the world today and see all these dehumanized people, there's a reason. They want the pill to cure them of the legitimate anxiety. And even those who go for better purposes, they go to the system to quell the neurotic anxiety, they have no idea who they're talking to. They don't know that these men in the white coats are waiting for you. Because the pill they give you that will knock out the neurotic anxiety also takes out the legitimate anxiety and zombifies you. But you need that legitimate anxiety to be a human being. This is what Freud already had understood. The remedy can be worse than the cure. Thomas Zaz says psychiatry is the disease of which it pretends to be the cure. He's alluding to this point. So the big pharma we know today, and the DSM nonsense, right, is exactly this. It lures you in by saying, we're treating your neurotic misery. You deserve to be happy. Look at our commercials, all smiles. Knowing full well that the pill that they're giving you is going to mollify also the legitimate misery that makes you truly human, that makes you stand up against tyranny, that makes you suffer for the world, that makes you conscious of what's going on in humanity. So when you look around now and you see all these anesthetized people with their artificial happiness, that's another danger. And a lot of it, not all of it, a lot of it, especially for women, right, is linked to the matrophobia. So out of this little dynamic between daughter and mother comes this bigger edifice. See, small things lead to big things. So how are you going to fight that tyranny up there? Think somebody in government's going to fix it? The root cause isn't even being addressed.
Exactly. And that's the point. And I know that a lot of women don't want to see this kind of fate for their children. They want to see their children happy. A lot of the stuff Michael's spoken about today, these are unconscious complexes. While there will be some women who are aware of the damage they're causing, in a great number, women mean well, but they don't understand what's running the show. And this is why it's so important, as Michael's pointed out, that we need to look at what's controlling, like what factors are controlling society, what is engineering society, and also understand our own psychology. It's worth looking into if you care about where the generations to come after we leave are going to go, what quality of life our children are going to have. We can make a difference, and this will be one of the most courageous things that we can do, but not just that, the most effective. No amount of placards or protests are going to change it. We have to change. So, Michael, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. You're one of the most, I would say, just studied individuals on these topics. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights and your wisdom and your knowledge with us.
That's what it's all about. And I'm so glad that we're able to talk again like we did last time. And because I find this fascinating. I don't find this controversial. I find this interesting. Just in the same way that a botanist or herbalist will look at their subject. I have never thought of it as controversial. And when I look around in the world and try to get solution oriented, I'm convinced myself 100% that we're on the right track here. So that's why I have the conviction. You know, yeah, a handful of empowered women, they can change. You see, when people say it's all impossible, it can't change, it's a big uphill battle. This is because they underestimate what beauty can do and even what sexuality can do. Those things are positive. They're biophilous, you know? And so when women step up to the plate and use their beauty and their sexuality for this higher cause, and yes, they can be into politics, but more importantly, they're going to the root cause of things and they understand the psychological underpinnings. Believe you me, I'm a big believer that huge, titanic changes can take place. I will not be the one to be able to do it, but I do have the hope and the belief that others can once they sincerely pick this up without fear. That's the future I look to, and we work towards it. So again, big thanks to you. I was really excited to do this. I hope we can do more in the future. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I would really like that too. It's a topic I agree with you. I don't see it as controversial either. I see it as refreshing and confronting. These are things that make a person feel alive instead of repressed, to look at these things but come out the other side realizing that for facing it, we've reclaimed more of ourself again. So to me, I don't see it as controversial either. I know it can be triggering. I want to acknowledge that for anybody who's listening who's getting rocked by some of the stuff that's been brought up. It can be really uncomfortable, but it's worth looking at. And I just want to thank you again, Michael. So maybe we can talk about this in the future. And I'll make sure that all of the links are set with this video so that you know where to find Michael's work. We've got dragonmother.org, unslaved.com, michaeltsarion.com, and we'll also list some books and references that Michael spoke about throughout the show so that you can start doing your own research for yourself if you feel called to do that.